It was economic concerns that got Dan Goldman banned from that coffee shop in Brooklyn?
I think, first of all, that was horrible. And so I want to make sure I lift it up. Dan Goldman is a gentleman as far as I'm concerned. I also think it was horrible, the anti-Haitian and anti-black rhetoric, and anti-Muslim rhetoric that occurred with the Chevalier race. But I do think economics is at the root of it, and equality.
In that specific instance, do you think it had anything to do with economics?
A lot of specifics, but we need to look at what's happening.
I just want you to admit what was actually behind these congressional races.
We're
talking all around it.
No, we're not. What was behind those races was that people can't afford to live and the inequality that exists in different spaces.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the channel. Grab a seat, because this one gets spicy fast. Tonight on the CNN NewsNight panel, New York public advocate Jumaane Williams steps into the 5th seat and walks straight into a crossfire over the wave of Democratic Socialist primary wins shaking up the party. On one side, you have a conservative voice warning that this whole movement is dragging the country off a cliff. On the other, Jumaane keeps yanking the fight back to one word the establishment really does not want to talk about: affordability. And when he gets pushed to confess some secret agenda behind these races, his answer is exactly the kind of clean refusal that makes a panel go quiet. Stick around all the way through, because the back half is where the real fireworks land, and you do not want to miss how this one closes. And before we jump in, drop a comment and let me know what city or country you are tuning in from. I genuinely love seeing how far this community reaches. All right, let's get into it.
Joining us now in our 5th seat is Jumaane Williams. He's the public advocate for the city of New York. And Jumaane, I wonder if, just to respond to what Jamie Harrison is saying, is he right to say, if you're not a card-carrying Democrat, get out of our party, don't even bother running?
First, I start off every sentence with Nixon 5, so I just have to put that out there.
Okay.
But the truth is, he's incorrect. Like the whole context is wrong. And we keep pretending somehow that the people in power in a lot of places were not folks from outside who came into the party one way or the other, didn't like what was happening, said, I'm going to try to make some change. And that's what's happening here. And quite honestly, what we see happen in New York City is, to me, an extension of what happened from 2008, where people who may not have even bought a black toothbrush voted for Barack Obama. They then voted for Donald Trump. There are people in New York City who voted for Donald Trump and AOC. People have been
Zohran
saying,
Mamdani
that's
after
correct.
that, yeah.
There are people who are saying, we don't want the status quo, we don't want the same message and the same messenger. The party leadership that I belong to has rejected that time and time again, and every decision they've made has led us to Donald Trump, and every decision they made have led us to this point. So my hope is that the party will finally say, let's listen to some messaging that is actually working, messaging that pushes back against the divisiveness that we've been seeing and hearing.
If there's one thing a political party is going to do, it's to protect the political party as it currently is. And the people who know that the best are perhaps Republicans who experienced it vividly in 2016 when Donald Trump ran for the nomination, and he ran as an outsider, and he shook up the party, and he dispensed with all the establishment types, and then he took over the party with all of his extreme views on all sorts of things. And I call them extreme because that's what Republicans called them at the time. So, I mean, this is actually, in some ways, kind of a Trump playbook.
Well, except Trump wasn't trying to, bring about the downfall of Western civilization like some of these socialist candidates are in the Democratic Party. And so, I mean, look, I'm not a Democrat, but I've been amused at the infighting in New York City today, and some of it is pretty powerful constituencies. I saw a video last night in one of these victory parties of a room full of young white socialists screaming at a television with Hakeem Jeffries on it, who's poised, by the way, to possibly become the first black Speaker of the House, going, you're next, you're next, you're next. Not a great look for the party. I saw that Mamdani went after the head of the Hispanic caucus as well. I see Tish James is even mad at Mamdani. So there's a lot of splits.
All of a sudden, Republicans are so into identity politics. I'm shocked.
I am shocked. A few things here. First, a lot of times in campaigns, we see politicians endorse other candidates, endorse politicians, and that's all they do, right? You get a press release that says so and so just endorsed me. No, this I would say, Mamdani and his team, which have figured out the formula in New York City, not only endorsed, they campaigned with these candidates. His team was working with these candidates, the team that was so effective in working on social media and getting voters out. Also, let's remember that it was, I think, something like 5% of eligible voters that showed up to vote in yesterday's primary. So very few votes made a very big difference.
I was on the ground speaking to voters. So let me say, it is usually a very few amount of people who make a decision anyway. So the pretending like that
it's a party primary.
That's correct.
This is the moment the whole panel tips, and you can feel it happen in real time. The former party chair basically tells anyone who is not a lifelong loyalist to get out, and Jumaane does not flinch. He says flat out that the man is incorrect, that the whole context is wrong. And here is what people do not realize. Every single person currently holding power inside that party machine got there by being an outsider at some point. They walked in, they did not like what they saw, and they fought to change it. So the gatekeeping line is not principle, it is fear. It is the establishment protecting itself, dressed up as loyalty and naum. Then the conservative voice in the room does the thing that gives the entire game away. He looks at this energy, this movement of young people actually showing up, and he says these candidates want to bring about the downfall of Western civilization. Let me break down why that matters. When you cannot argue against affordability, against healthcare, against people wanting to pay rent, you reach for the scariest words you can find. Western civilization is collapsing because people want cheaper groceries? Come on. That is not an argument. That is a panic button. You have to understand the pattern here. We have seen movements written off as extreme before, only for those exact ideas to become the mainstream a decade later. The social security fights, the labor fights, the civil rights fights, all of it was called radical in its moment. So when someone smirks and calls a movement dangerous, history tells you to look closer, and Jumaane keeps it grounded. He points out that this was not some massive endorsement press release where you slap a name on a flyer. The team actually campaigned door to door with these candidates. And then he drops the number that nobody on the other side wants to sit with. Roughly 5% of eligible voters showed up. 5%. That is the system as it stands. So before anyone screams about a takeover, maybe ask why 95% felt like it did not matter who they sent.
But I want to be clear, on the ground, what people cared about is affordability. What people cared about was feeling safe and what that means in their community. What people cared about was healthcare. So the construct is incorrect, because I think people care about that across the country, definitely in New York City. What the Republican Party has been able to do is say that you don't feel safe, you don't feel like you can afford to pay here because of people you may not like, whether it is trans, whether it is immigrants. What Mamdani and others, by the way, there's always been an issue with class and race when it comes to the left, and we have to address that. But what they have been able to do, that the reason that you can't live in New York City is because of an exploitive economic system. And that economic system is what needs to change.
But can I ask you, I mean, to me, Nydia Velázquez is a progressive.
Yeah.
She is, she's most definitely, and she was in Congress for 34 and a half years.
Correct.
She endorsed somebody to replace her, and that's who Mamdani beat yesterday. Mamdani's candidate beat yesterday. To me, Adriano Espaillat, the first Dominican to be elected to Congress, was an undocumented immigrant also. I don't see them as moderate.
Nydia's legacy should have been more respected. Let's just be clear about that.
And she was the first member of the New York Congressional Caucus to endorse Mamdani.
What Republicans has been good at is making these labels, even though people don't know what they are. And so what I do know is there's a lot of agreement about what people feel and want to be able to afford where they live and want to feel safe and want health care. When we decide these labels, the biggest thing to me about yesterday and the way the direction we have been going is who is going to use their political capital to push past the normal ways of doing business in politics. And that is what voters are saying. I want the person now who is going to push past, I guess the best way to put it may be respectability politics, which we do need, but push past that. So when I get a phone call from a leader of a legislature, or I get a phone call from the executive, I'm going to push past that and say, this is what my constituents.
Over the past 8 months, all of you in this room know how much the Democratic machine has tried to count us out. How at every turn they've underestimated us. And in the words of Shirley Chisholm, even if the establishment machine has done everything in its power to keep our community from having a seat at the table, Well, I have some bad news for them. We brought folding chairs.
All right.
I
mean, the establishment machine, she's
Abby,
going after
look,
them.
We're still in the anti-establishment element of our political history, I suppose, in our country right now.
And here is where Jumaane refuses to let the conversation get hijacked. He pulls it right back to the ground and says what people actually cared about was affordability. Not labels, not slogans, affordability. Feeling safe, healthcare, that is it. That is the whole thing. And this is the part that blows my mind, because it is so obvious, and yet the other side keeps pretending it is some exotic foreign agenda. Then he does something genuinely sharp. He names the playbook out loud. He says the strategy has been to convince you that you do not feel safe, that you cannot afford to live, and to blame it on people you may not like, whether it is trans people, whether it is immigrants. That is the trick. Point the angry finger sideways at your neighbor, so you never look up at the people actually setting the prices. And Jumaane does not let it slide. He says the real reason you cannot live in this city is an exploitive economic system, and that system is what has to change. And here is what people miss. He is not even pretending the left is innocent on this. He openly admits there has always been a problem with class and race on his own side that needs addressing. That honesty is exactly why the affordability message lands. He is not selling a fantasy. He is naming a real failure and pointing at a real cause. Then the panel reads that statement, and it is the line that sticks with you. The one about how the establishment machine did everything in its power to keep the community from having a seat at the table. And the answer? We brought folding chairs. That is the whole movement in one sentence. You would not give us a seat, so we built our own. You cannot fake that kind of energy, and you definitely cannot buy it.
But to me, if I'm a Democrat, I'm really wondering and I'm really concerned about this going beyond just New York, beyond Washington, D.C., because I can assure you we're going to make the argument to voters, you can either be for less taxes or the party that wants to tax you more, because if you're going to say everything's for free, that money has to come from somewhere.
Well, it already is happening all around the country.
You run the risk of pushing out a lot of highly successful people.
I think what the people like Zohran Mamdani are putting on the table is, do we need a more fair economic system where people at the bottom can do better and not just people at the top? And the reason that message is resonating is because it is a fact that economic inequality has been supercharged in the last 10, 20, 30 years in this country. So that is a fact that's irrespective of where you are in this country. And I think that's why there is a real question of, it's not about, are you going to run socialists everywhere, but is the anger against the establishment, the anger against an economic system that is leaving people worried about what they put in their gas tank and how much money they have for it, is that anger going to fuel candidates that speak to it versus the candidates who just want to maintain the status quo?
I would say that one of the things we learned last night is that past the very friendly smile of Zohran Mamdani, he is a ruthless tactician and an ideologue who wants more people of his ideological bent elected, and he's not satisfied with just being. And he doesn't. And even Nydia Velázquez endorsed him, and the other thing that from last night is, to quote my friend Whoopi Goldberg, I would say to Chuck Schumer, dude, you're in danger, because this I think puts a lot of wind in the sails of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez to challenge him.
Economic concerns that got Dan Goldman banned from that coffee shop in Brooklyn?
I think, first of all, that was horrible. And so I want to make sure I lift it up. Dan Goldman is a gentleman as far as I'm concerned. I also think it was horrible, the anti-Haitian and anti-black rhetoric, and anti-Muslim rhetoric that occurred with the Chevalier race. But I do think economics is at the root of it, and equality.
In that specific instance, do you think it had anything to do with economics?
A lot of specifics, but we need to look at what's happening.
I just want you to admit what was actually behind these congressional races.
We're
talking all around it.
No, we're not. What was behind those races was that people can't afford to live, and the inequality that exists in different spaces.
Oh, this is the part I have been waiting for. The conservative finally drops the mask and goes for the oldest line in the book. He says you can either be for less taxes or for the party that wants to tax you more. And then he warns that you will push out a lot of highly successful people. And I need you to really sit with how empty that is. Because what he is actually saying is that the comfort of the people at the very top matters more than whether a working family can keep the lights on. That is the entire argument. Protect the top, scare everyone else. And the response is the knockout, because it is not emotional, it is just true. The point gets made that economic inequality has been supercharged over the last 10, 20, 30 years in this country. That is not a feeling, that is a fact, and it does not care which state you live in. The gap got wider, year after year, while everyone at the bottom was told to be patient. So when people finally get angry about it, calling them radical is not a rebuttal. It is a confession that you have got nothing else. And then comes my favorite exchange of the entire thing. The conservative leans in and demands that Jumaane just admit what was mon pramouche. Really behind these races, like there is some secret agenda hiding under the table. And Jumaane does not blink. He says, no, 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 we are not doing that. He refuses the trap completely and says what was behind those races was that people cannot afford to live and the inequality that exists everywhere. That is it. No conspiracy, no hidden hand. Just people who are tired of being squeezed. And here is what I want you to take away from all of this. The other side keeps trying to turn an economic conversation into a culture war, because the second it becomes about actual numbers, about rent and groceries and wages, they lose. Every time. So they reach for scary labels and imaginary agendas. But you cannot label your way out of a bill people cannot pay. That is why this message keeps winning. And that is why they are so scared of it. So what do you guys think of this? Leave your thoughts down in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next video.